So special commendation, I think, would have to go to ASEP, to IMANI, to GOGIC, to NRGI, to even PIAC, which is the government, quasi body which is responsible for ensuring that oil revenues are accurately and effectively utilized. I just came back 2 days ago. There was a discussion that I partook in the House of Commons in London, and it really revolved around some of these issues around energy access, energy affordability, resource management, and how countries like Ghana could effectively utilize their oil and gas resources. So today I want to walk you through a number of things looking at the future of Ghana's energy supply or industry, but the twist that I have given to it is how do we avoid some of the surprises that we saw, particularly in the last 5 years, with doomsday lasting from 2014 right through to the latter part of 2016, or you could even argue mid-2017. My background is in energy economics. I do a lot of work in this sector, but then I also do the interesting political dimension to how these resources are utilized. So for today's talk, I focus on two big thematic questions. And the big thematic questions are split into a number of points. I don't want to belabor and go through all of this, but the key thing I want us to take home at the end of this discussion and the conversations with the panel as well really would be, given where we are with our oil and gas industry since 2010, December of 2010 when we started production, how do we take the industry to the next phase of development? But more importantly, how do we situate that, or how do we bring a align GMPC's role within the context of this evolving industry? And when we look at the sectoral issues around local content, revenue management, and then integrating the oil and gas industry into the wider economy, what are some of the potential pitfalls that we've observed in the last 7 years, and going forward, how do we put in place plans, policies, measures to address them? In the power sector, and it ties into the oil and gas sector, again, the focus really is around energy supply, energy access. I will talk a lot more about gas supply and LNG imports. I'll talk about market reform, and then tie that in with the debate about the whole brouhaha, for want of a better word, around the ECG privatization and what that actually means for the economy going forward. So what's the context to all of this discussion? The context of this discussion arises from the surprises that we've witnessed over the last 3 years. So on the slide here, you could actually see in the bottom right-hand corner, Ghana's GDP growth rates over past 8 years. But we could see the impact that doomsday particularly had from 2014, 15, 16, where at one point, growth, when we recorded well over 14% at the height of the oil boom, started dwindling. We had doomsday 14, 15, 16, and just about 2017, 18 going forward, we've seen an increase or an uptick in activity. It's important to note here, though, that all the improvement that we've seen in economic growth rates starting from 2017 could also be attributed as a lag effect. So some of the structural policies that were undertaken in 15 and 16 actually translated into the GDP growth numbers that we are seeing in 2017 and going forward in 2018, 19. It's not an instantaneous or something that actually took place overnight. It goes back or transcends a number of policies that have been done by various governments. But this growth has been underpinned by a number of things. So we've seen a lot of increasing demand for Ghana's natural resources, particularly gold, gold and then oil output. But we've seen improvements in Ghana's overall governance and macroeconomic indicators. And then the increase in rapid urbanization and domestic demand all partly contribute to what we're witnessing in the next, what we're seeing in 2017 and going forward into 2018-19. The medium-term outlook in terms of the economy for Ghana really is one in which, if the current policies and measures are sustained, we are looking at a region of between 7 and 8.5% growth rate consistently over the next 5 to 10 years. But what that really means for the oil sector in terms of this context really is that for the oil sector, or the growth that we have seen in the last 7-8 years, I mentioned, has been driven predominantly by natural resource exports, particularly cocoa and then also oil. And with regards to oil, typically you look at some sort of value creation framework. And for a lot of governments that I have worked with in a private consulting capacity, they are often interested in a number of things. They're interested in the taxes or the revenues that come from the production, but they're interested in the economics spin-offs in the sense that you're looking at how skills are developed working with different partners and the supply chain. They look at how you can grow indigenous Ghanaian companies that have the specialist expertise to service the industry locally but also regionally, and how you bring that integrated workforce and specialists as an export opportunity. This is not particularly targeted at Ghana as a whole, but these are the sort of questions that often governments would be looking at in terms of how to actually take advantage of the opportunities that are prevalent within the life cycle of an oil and gas project. However, since 2015, when we saw oil and gas prices starting to decline on the global level, we've seen that having a big impact on investments across the world, and Ghana being one of them as well, which has thrown a lot of the opportunities that government potentially are looking at in terms of getting the spin-offs into a bit of off gear. But that's within the context, in the Ghanaian case, of a number of things having taken place in the oil and gas industry. So on the slide here, what I've done is really to map out the key milestones that have taken place in Ghana's oil and gas industry since 2004, when the first new contracts were signed. But the thing to really observe in all of this is within the period 2011 to 2014, after we started first production from 2010, a number of institutional regulatory frameworks have been set up, and that includes, the Petroleum Commission Act. We've seen the Revenue Management Act and its amendment. We've seen the local content regulations also subsequently being passed, and we've seen PIAC being set up under the PRMA to do its work of revenue accountability in the sector. But post 2014, we saw oil prices going down, and that significantly had an impact on Ghana's economy. I remember very well when the 2015 budget was presented, the government made an assumption, an oil price assumption of $99.38 per barrel. And they were expecting to get in excess of $1 billion USD of revenues coming in that particular fiscal year. However, in July of every year. It's not too bad when you look at the numbers, in the sense that currently we have over 90% of the urban population connected to the grid, and then we've got 67% of the rural population still being connected to the grid. Actually, Ghana next to South Africa are the two countries in all of Sub-Saharan Africa that have this higher levels of electrification rate in excess of 80%. If you look at Sierra Leone and Liberia, they are, below 20%, but particularly because of the issues with the war and political instability, which, had an impact on that. So we have moved from, 20–30% electrification rate. Now we're sitting just a little around. We've moved. That's the urban, yes, the population, yes. So we've moved just a little over 70%. The current figure is actually around 80%. However, we're still not, generating enough power in terms of the intensity to drive industry forward. So if you look at the East Asian and the Pacific countries, in terms of the power that they consume per every capita of GDP output, this is where they fare. When you look at Ethiopia, Ghana, Nigeria, and all of Sub-Saharan Africa, if we really want to leapfrog and catch up with these guys, then this is the size of the gap that we've got to address. And it's an easy challenge. These things will take some kind of years to come up with. So we've had crisis upon crisis, and the government response to many of these crises has been liberalizing the market, introducing some of the demand-side load management, by energy efficiency. So in the 2006–2007 crisis that we have, the Kufuor government, I do recall, they replaced all the incandescent bulbs with LED or CFLs, and that was able to save part of the energy that would have ordinarily been used. And then even when we had the recent crisis as well, similar measures were introduced by the government of the day. And we've had expansion of the grid to various communities. What we haven't done though, or what we haven't done too greatly on, is improving the capacity expansion. And this is more historical than recent underpinnings. So we've signed all these power purchase agreements, but that has been more of a knee-jerk reaction to the crisis than the initial forward planning that would have been needed. So currently, the generation mix is really coming from more of thermal power and then hydro, because historically hydro has been fairly unreliable. But the interesting thing I see consistently is we talk about we want to increase renewable energy in the total energy mix. And back 10 years ago, there was a target to get 10% of the energy mix coming from renewable sources by 2020. We are in 2018. And as I speak to you now, the total renewable energy component of our energy mix is actually less than 1%. In reality, it's actually 0.25 something percent of the total energy mix. So the big policy talks is one thing. Translating that into actual investments, and the regulatory environment that supports the uptake of renewables is another thing altogether. I will quickly skip over that. But when we've had these crisis upon crisis, we go in and sign these power purchase agreements, or bring in IPPs who sign a power purchase agreement with the government. But typically you have an IPP who would have to sign a PPA, Rwanda or Malawi, and I've listed some of them here. But you can broadly categorize them across three strands, from political to economic to social. On the political bit, things around government instability. On the economic bit, we're looking at things like inability to recover the cost of generation, because the current tariff structure does not generate or guarantee a return on investment for this energy sector going forward. because the thermal generation component is forecasted to rise from the current 57 to about 65, sometimes 70% in the medium-term outlook. And so it means we need a lot of gas to fuel the plants. We have significant gas discoveries that we've made domestically, and that will be able to actually meet our base case demand for power in the past. And historically, of course, we wanted to, the plan was to meet the deficit by importing gas from Nigeria, but we know the age-old issues with the West African gas pipeline and its inability to meet the contractual volumes. In getting the gas to come on stream, I mentioned that in the base case scenario, the domestic gas resources that we have from 10, Jubilee and Sankofa can meet the power generation deficit that we need. However, in the medium term, from the mid-2020s, we will have to consider potentially, LNG imports. And this is an interesting area that I also find that there are about 3 separate proposals on the table with regards to LNG, where the government is working with these companies that I have listed above, but NPC and Gazprom. And from a political risk sort of contractual lens point of view, I was just really wondering, that if we've got these Quantum and then the Sahara projects coming on stream, and we're bringing the Gazprom other one also on stream, potentially we could be looking at some oversupply or overcapacity issues in the market. And these contracts would have things, they'll have elements to do with capacity charges that would have to pay. And so we would have to potentially streamline these projects, the timing in terms of when they come on stream. This is the experience I have seen rather with the power sector, where and as the government reacted to the crisis, they signed over 30 or so power purchase agreements, and the capacity charges on some of them range from 3 cents a kilowatt hour to well in excess of 5-7 cents a kilowatt hour, just to ensure that the plant was available. But most of them we actually didn't need, because we're going to have a huge excess supply in the market. And this is something we will have to still watch out for when it comes to the LNG sector, as we attempt to bridge the gap going forward. The key policy considerations around LNG really is the price, how it's indexed and linked to our prices, the foreign exchange risks, the contract terms, where it's either take or pay, and then the levies and margins that we apply on the sector. This is very much like what happens in the downstream oil and gas sector with the pricing approach. But what I want to show here before I just wrap up is, when you look at the domestic sources of gas that we've got, currently for the associated gas, which is gas that is free and available to the government, the price of that is just around $2.53 for every million British thermal units. With LNG, and if we wanted to use crude oil, this was done in 2013 by the World Bank. The prices have also come down significantly. But the big question is, how would all of these ultimately transmit into the price of the electricity tariff? I'll wrap up. One big policy initiative I have seen has been the launch of this ESLA bond to want to resolve the sector's historical indebtedness. So we're looking at the figure is about 2.3 billion, and out of that you can see about 800 million is actually money that's owed to the banks, and 440 of that is owed to various fuel suppliers. And with the launch of the bond and then subsequent use of the monies to settle this indebtedness, 2 things are likely to happen. One, which is reduce the NPL loans portfolio within the banking sector, but then also enhance the overall profitability of the off-takers within the energy market. Which brings me to the point on ECG, where are we looking at privatization being the answer to the persistent woes of ECG? This I took from my Journal 9's website, and I think it was a protest march organized by PWU, Public Utilities, PUWU Workers Union, where they raised interesting points or questions around the privatization and the concession. But, you know, are we looking at a scenario post-privatization? We'll probably see One Love and Mensa becoming, you know, the face figures for ECG. That's a bit on the light side. But the point here is that there's this 20-year PSP agreement, which is backed by the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And at the core, it's to address the systemic issues that affect ECG. ECG cannot account for 25% of all power that it procures from the IPPs. If you look at that number in other established markets, the figure sometimes is below 5%. And the target is to actually move to below 5%. And to do that, it needs investment. But it also needs investment, you know, revenue collection, reducing the commercial losses. But the nice thing that I saw in the PSP agreement, which became the subject of debate, was this 51% indigenous equity participation in the PSP agreement. To the extent that one of the private sector companies that wanted to bid to operate the concession pulled out on the basis of this 51%, you know, indigenization requirement in that. But I think overall, if we want to improve the power sector's sustainability, then we need to have a much more system-based approach fundamentally, where the automatic adjustment formula has to be rigorously applied, the age-old issue of subsidies dealt with, settling of the indebtedness. But another point I find interesting is it possible actually to have all the government buildings, you know, move or become smart buildings? If I walk into the facility and you used it and you walked out, the lights should be able to go off automatically within 5 hours if you can, sorry, within 5 minutes if you cannot, you know, detect any human activity within that sector. But these little things, when you actually add them up, you know, go a long way to ensure that, you know, we improve on the profitability of the sector. So I'll finish up with my take-home point on the power sector. We have to develop, or there is a need for an integrated sort of long-term energy roadmap, a master plan. We have a gas master plan. There's bits of document all over the place on the energy or the power master plan, but we've got to actually integrate all of these across the value chain, how upstream, midstream, downstream, and then the power sector all connect together. And that would have to then form the basis of government discussions going. And I know some work is being done on this. But within the sectoral framework in terms of policies, regarding the gas sector, we need critically to pass the Gas Act to give meaning to the master plan, the gas master plan that was passed in 2014. And by that, I mean practically defining the roles of the different sector agencies, how gas is priced, and, you know, the tariff methodology that we apply, including some of the things around third-party access to infrastructure. These they're fairly technical, but it's work that needs to be done if we really want to get the gas sector integrated within the wider energy framework. Yes, we need a gas pricing policy and regulatory framework, in the sense that even with Jubilee, we discovered Jubilee 2007, started producing in 2010. The contract says that up to the first 200 billion cubic feet of gas, that's basically free, it goes to the government. But post the 200 BCF, we actually need to agree on a gas price that would pay for the gas that's processed at the wellhead. As I speak, that is still yet, it's a subject of debate, not debate, subject of discussion between the government and the IOCs. The framework that we pass in terms of gas pricing has to have the core principles of cost-reflective pricing that ensures that the financial viabilities of the different entities within the chain become that ensures the financial viability of the different operating entities within the power or the gas to power value chain. The other point is on the enabling environment for renewable energy. Again, one of the things I have been pushing for is for us to actually move towards an auctions-based system for renewable energy. So currently the feed-in tariff policy that we have has not worked. And I showed you the fact that we had these beautiful plans 10 years ago. We wanted to get 10% of the energy mix being renewable by 2020. As we speak, it's less than 1%. And part of the reason really is that even in the presence of a feed-in tariff, which is way higher than the tariff that the thermal-based producers pay, the difference is about 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. It still has not translated into IRE development. What other countries have done, and 2 examples I'll cite here, is Zambia and then South Africa. What they have done is actually get the different IPPs to actually come in and auction to deploy large-scale solar onto the grid, where you auction and compete on the basis of the power that is delivered. And it's been a huge success story in South Africa under the REIPP project, where because solar prices or solar modules are falling, some of the bids are coming in at about 3 cents a kilowatt hour for power that is delivered to the grid. And what that would do, even if we've got that 10% component, would be that ultimately tariffs might actually, end up being, relatively much more cheaper for consumers. Different financing models. I talk about an innovation and a development fund for off-grid innovation that needs to be set up, and this would be to connect some of the communities, in the upper water regions where they still are not connected to the grid. I mentioned the fact that we've got 67% of the rural communities getting access to the grid, so we still have 30% really to go. And part of the way to do that would be potentially via an innovation and development fund. And I'll touch lastly on what some of the private sector initiatives that I have seen which actually needs to be encouraged. So 2 companies I cite here, one being run by a friend of mine, Kobna, Translight Solar, and then another company in Kenya called Mkoba. And what they're actually doing is moving from the mainstream to distributed on-site modular energy. And that allows communities or people at a lower income level to get access to electricity. And it's being deployed by using things like, the mobile infrastructure, and other payment solutions that we're seeing on the market. So there's quite a bit that also needs to be done here, and it's an opportunity for private sector sort of players to get into the market. But that has to be done together with the policy initiatives that would ensure that this is actually looked at from a holistic, integrated point of view than any other. So bottom line, with all this long stuff that I've said, is yes, on the economy, we see the momentum being sustained, but if you really are looking at the robustness of the recovery over the next 10 years, then it will depend on the ability of whichever government of the day delivering on the oil and gas production targets, but then using those receipts that we get to grow the non-oil sectors of the economy. So that's developing the linkages. It's one big subject area of work that is being done. But we have to map out the opportunities for industrialization, and that ties into the value linkages where we identify clearly some of the niche areas that the private sector, together with the government, can actually favorably participate in. Yes, boost ECG's revenue mobilization initiative by the PSP agreement, but we still have to address the fundamental recurrent non-payment risk within the energy sector value chain. And I think at this point I'll probably pause and